What's going on, YouTube gamers? Bonfire here, bringing you guys my review of the PlayStation 4 aka Dualshock 4 controller. And the way I do reviews is we're going to go over some of the features of the Dualshock 4, talk about those a little bit, and then I'm going to leave you with some positives and negatives of the controller. That way, if you decide to pick up the Dualshock 4, or if you're on the fence about getting a PlayStation 4 because of the controller, you'll now be informed on what it's all about. So, first off, I would say one of the most prominent features of the Dualshock 4 are the triggers. And if you look here, you can see that it's now a concave actual trigger. When you compare that to the Dualshock 3 controller, that wasn't there. And one thing that most people who have played PlayStation 3 first-person shooter games will know, that you didn't use these buttons for aiming down sights and actually firing your weapon. You used L1 and R1. It just didn't feel natural. And when you would use L2 and R2, whether it be throw grenades or use a special grenade, anything like that, you find yourself slipping off a little bit, and it just didn't feel natural. It didn't work that well. And that's been addressed with the Dualshock 4. It's nice. Your fingers fit right over it. The triggers respond really well. They bounce back. So when you're using semi-automatic weapons, it's easy to use. And the biggest thing, I can't say it enough, it feels natural. It's much improved. Next is the handles. What I'm talking about here is the handles of the controller. Now you compare that to the Dualshock 3. It is much improved. They're actually a little longer. And that is very big, and I think it makes it a big improvement. Now, because in the Dualshock 3 controller, they weren't very long. The controller was overall pretty small. And I imagine people with larger hands would have a difficult time gripping this, holding it, especially on those longer play sessions. Now that they have longer handles, it makes gripping it more ergonomical and natural feeling. It feels very good. And again, I don't have the biggest hands in the world, but people that do have larger hands, I think are really going to enjoy this controller, because now they can fully get a good grip on it, and it'll last longer in those play sessions. Now, speaking of the handles, you'll notice here two different colors with the dark gray and the black. This dark gray is actually a textured back. I like to call it a grippy. And I think it's something very cool and unique to this controller that you don't see very often. Because now that you have this grip on the back, it makes it easier to hold, especially during those longer play sessions. Because not a lot of controllers are doing this. Now, there are aftermarket products and third-party products like Squid Grip you can add to your controller for more of a firm grip and to help with perspiration. But I think this is a nice addition that makes it doesn't really have, you don't need those third-party products now unless you prefer them. And I think that's really cool. I'd like to see that in more controllers here. Now, if you have super sweaty hands, I think it'll help you a little bit. It's not going to be the most helpful thing if you have really a lot of perspiration. But for normal people like myself, who maybe during longer play sessions will sweat a little bit, you're still going to have a good grip on it. And like I said, it's a pretty cool and unique feature. I like what they did there. And that's a big improvement of the Dualshock 3 because it's just smooth here. Next is the analog sticks, and this is another area where I believe there is a big need for improvement, especially when it comes to first-person shooters. And what they've done here is they've actually made a concave analog stick with a ring around the outside that makes it concave, and it just, again, feels natural. You put your thumbs on the stick, and it's easier to grip now that it's concave, because when you played first-person shooters before, you sometimes find your fingers slipping off the Dualshock 3 because it just sticks out. It's smooth. And the grip, the material that it was made out of just wasn't the grippiest. And you could use it for first-person shooters. It wasn't the worst thing in the world. But when you compared the Dualshock 3 to the Xbox 360's controller, the analog sticks on the 360s were a little better because they had concave analog sticks. And they addressed that. The Dualshock 4 finally has that, and it does have a gripped material on it that is really grippy, and you're not going to find your fingers sliding off this, not only due to the grip, but because of the concave analog stick. Another thing about the analog sticks is they're actually closer to, you can't really see it here, but they're actually closer to the controller than the DualShock 3. And even though they're closer, they're more precise. So when you're playing those games, you have more precision in your aiming and response when you're moving it. And I think that's really awesome and surprising, because usually you want them a little longer to get more precision. Last thing about the analog sticks, they've actually made them farther apart than on the DualShock 3, as you can see there. And again, I think that's a big improvement, gives it a more natural feeling when you're playing those games. Next is the D-pad, and what they've done with the D-pad is they've actually raised it up a little bit and made it easier to use. So on the previous DualShock 3 controller, it wasn't very raised up. It was everything that we've seen in previous iterations on the PlayStation controller, but they've finally tweaked it to make it feel a little easier to use. And it's responsive, it clicks really well, and I like what they've done there. Next, real briefly, is the share and option buttons. And this is basically your new start and select, if you will, because, well, we all know what share does, and I've gone over that. But the options button is going to basically bring up your menu in any games, from what I've seen. Nice thing about them is their placement I thought was a little weird at first, but it's easier to use. They're just right there, right around the touchpad. Now, speaking of the touchpad, that's what I wanted to talk about next, is it's actually a button as well. So you do use it for a touchpad, and then it's a button as well. Now, one of the things that I think is disappointing with the touchpad is it hasn't been incorporated in very many games just yet. I know it's in Killzone's campaign. I haven't actually tried that out, but in everything else that I have played, it acts as a button to bring up a menu. And I find that I want to use it more. I want to use it for the touchpad. I hope developers can find cool uses for it, because I want to see that going forward. As of right now, it's just a button. But like I said, it is still easy to use, and it is accessible with either thumb depending on how you play. Last is the battery life on the PlayStation 4 controller. And it has been said that it has about the same battery life as the DualShock 3. Unfortunately, I haven't noticed that. I feel like I only get at most 5 to 8 hours of actual game time. And maybe that's a lot, but it doesn't feel like as long as the DualShock 3. I felt like this had more of a battery life. Now, it could be because I'm using some of the motion features with the camera when I'm typing, which is a really cool feature, but it doesn't feel like it has that long a battery life. Maybe they'll address it with future iterations of the controller down the road, but that was a little disappointing to me. So overall, though, this controller is a huge improvement. And those who doubt the PlayStation controller for first-person shooters, that doubt should go away with the DualShock 4. Once you feel it, once you get in-game, you're playing it, it feels natural, it's good in your hand. The triggers and the analog sticks, what they've done to this controller is really catered to the first-person shooter community, as that is one of the most popular genres in video games. Very good. I like what they've done here. I think this is a fantastic controller. So now, the positives and negatives of the DualShock 4. First, we'll start with the positives, the triggers. Said it before, the R2, L2 are actual triggers now. They work really well, they're responsive, and feel natural. Next, the analog sticks. What they've done here, adding the concave and grip to it, and the distance, everything about it feels natural and works really well for all genres of games. The D-pad. The small additions, small improvements to the D-pad make it a huge improvement over the DualShock 3. It's much easier to use and more accessible. The textured back. I think this is a really cool and unique feature that they've added to controllers, and you don't see that in controllers nowadays. And I think that's a really cool feature that I hope a lot of people can appreciate and enjoy. The overall design. I think everything that they've done here is they've made a really ergonomical, comfortable feeling controller. Last is the motion functions. I didn't talk about this much, but you notice the blue bar down here has motion functions for when you have the PlayStation 4 camera. and it's really cool. What I've used it for is typing, just like you would like with a Wii remote, but it's really responsive, and I think that's surprising, and it's pretty cool. It's a really unique feature that I've found using the PlayStation 4, and responsive. Now the negatives. The first is the battery life. The battery life did not last as long as I thought it would. I don't think it's as long as the Dualshock 3. And like I said, I really only think you're getting about 5 to 8 hours of solid playtime per charge. The touchpad. Now the touchpad works, but the reason why I put this on the negative is because developers haven't used it much. So as of right now, it's almost a waste of space when you're using the touchpad. I hope it's incorporated more because I think it's a cool, unique feature to the PlayStation 4. And I want to see it used. I want to be able to use it more. Lastly is the length of the analog sticks. Now, I noticed they said that they were shorter than the Dualshock 3, and they are. And they're more responsive than the Dualshock 3. But I would like to have that same responsiveness with a little bit more length in the analog stick. That way you get even more accuracy, similar to what you'd have with Control Freaks. So there you guys have it, my review of the PlayStation 4 controller, aka the Dualshock 4. Let me know what you guys think about this controller down in the comments below. If you guys enjoy the video, let me know with a like. And if you're new, be sure to subscribe for more PlayStation 4 content. Until next time, I'm Bonfire, and I will see you online. Hey guys, don't forget Facebook and Twitter. Hit that button down below.